In 1798, Baron Pierre-François Percy, chief surgeon to the French Revolutionary Army, a man who had spent years cutting into battlefield wounds and documenting diseases from dysentery to gangrene, stood over a body that made him hesitate. The corpse belonged to a 26-year-old man. When Percy opened the mouth, he could see directly down into the stomach cavity. The esophagus was a tunnel. The organs were rotted. The smell forced his assistants back, and even after years of observing this patient, feeding him meals meant for 15 soldiers, watching him consume live animals whole, Percy still could not answer the simplest question: what was wrong with him? This is the story of Tarare, not the legend, not the myth. The documented medical case of a man whose body violated every principle of human physiology available to 18th century science. A man who ate constantly and weighed less than 100 pounds. Who was born into a world 2 centuries too early to even begin diagnosing what destroyed him. Who began as an abandoned child, became a street performer, became a soldier, became a medical experiment, and died suspected of eating a 14-month-old infant in a hospital ward. Every detail that follows comes from Percy's own records, preserved in the Memoir de l'Académie de Chirurgie, written by a surgeon trying desperately to understand something that should not exist. This is not a story about a monster. It is about a man who was sick in a body that consumed itself from the inside, surrounded by people who could not help him. Before Tarare ate anything, his body was already wrong. Baron Percy's first physical examination noted the eyes, bloodshot, not from sleeplessness or drink, but as a permanent condition. The skin was hot, not feverish in the way infection brings heat, but radiating warmth constantly, as though the body were burning fuel at a rate human metabolism should not permit. In cool air, steam rose visibly from Tarare's skin. When Percy touched him, the flesh felt like it was cooking from within. The mouth was worse. Lips so thin they nearly disappeared. When opened, it revealed the throat directly, abnormally wide, the interior visible without obstruction. Teeth stained dark brown, corroded by constant exposure to stomach acid. Percy noted the dimensions carefully, measuring with the precision of a man who had examined thousands of bodies. This was not normal variation. This was structural deformity. And then the smell. Percy's report described it as detectable from 20 feet away. Not the ordinary scent of a man who had not bathed. 18th century military surgeons were accustomed to that. But a stench that made patients in adjacent hospital beds complain, that drove orderlies out of rooms, that Percy himself described as rendering entire wards uninhabitable. By the standards of a French army surgeon in the 1790s, a man who worked in field hospitals where gangrene and dysentery were routine. This was remarkable. But the stomach was what Percy kept returning to in his notes. When empty, Tarare's abdomen appeared almost normal. After eating, it distended so grotesquely that Percy measured it. Skin stretched and sagged until Tarare could physically wrap it around his waist like fabric. The excess flesh hanging loose, still attached, still part of him. Within hours, it would deflate as the contents digested. The cycle repeated daily. The skin never tore. The body never adjusted. Tarare weighed less than 100 pounds. He was 17 years old. Percy documented one more detail that disturbed him more than the physical measurements. Animals reacted to Tarare before any interaction. Dogs growled and retreated. Cats fled. Horses shied. This was not learned behavior from watching Tarare eat. This was instinct. Something in his scent, his presence, triggered a threat response in creatures that had no context for what he was. Percy was an Enlightenment physician. He believed in observable phenomena, measurable data, anatomical cause and effect. He had trained in Paris, served in military campaigns, documented hundreds of medical anomalies. But Tarare's body operated according to rules that had no place in any taxonomy Percy had been taught. The man was hungry. Always. And nothing, no quantity of food, no type of nutrition, no medical intervention ever made him full. Tarare was not born in a hospital. He was born near Lyon, sometime around 1772, into a family whose name no record preserves. What is documented is this. By adolescence, his appetite had become economically impossible. His family expelled him, not out of cruelty. The sources suggest no abuse, no moral failing, but because they could not afford to feed him. In pre-industrial France, where subsistence farming and manual labor determined survival, a teenage boy who ate more than 4 adults combined was not a medical case. He was a financial catastrophe. So Terrer left, or was sent away. The distinction hardly mattered. He was perhaps 15 years old, alone, and hungry. He fell in with a charlatan. These figures were common in 18th century France, men who traveled from town to town selling patent medicines, performing minor surgery, pulling teeth, offering cures for ailments that physicians either could not or would not treat. They were part con artist, part entertainer, part desperate entrepreneur, operating in the gaps where legitimate medicine did not reach, and they needed a draw, something to gather a crowd before the sales pitch began. Terrer became the draw. The performances were documented by multiple witnesses, and later reconstructed in Percy's case notes. Terrer would position himself in a town square while the charlatan announced the spectacle. Then he would eat, not food necessarily, corks, whole, swallowed in sequence, then vomited back up intact. Stones, some as large as a fist, passed through his system and retrieved later. Entire baskets of apples, 30 or more, thrown into his throat one after another without pause, and live animals. Percy's account, cross-referenced with municipal records of the performances, describes this in clinical terms. Terrer consumed snakes, preferring the largest specimens, swallowing them whole while they still moved. Eels, similarly alive, disappeared down his throat without chewing. The crowd would watch the shape of the animal distend his neck as it slid into his stomach. Minutes later, Terrer would stand unbothered and wait for the next act. The cat incident was witnessed by enough people that it appears in multiple independent sources. Terrer seized a live cat. Accounts suggest it was provided by the audience as a challenge, and bit into its neck. He drank the blood directly. Then he tore the animal open with his teeth and hands, consuming the internal organs, the muscle tissue, everything except the skeleton. The fur he swallowed as well. Approximately 30 minutes later, in front of the same crowd, he vomited up a compacted ball of hair and bile. The bones, according to follow-up reports, passed through his digestive system over the following day. This was not starvation. This was his profession. The charlatan fed him. Terrer performed. The crowds paid. It was a transaction both parties understood. Terrer's body, his condition, his ability to violate every boundary of normal human digestion, had market value. He was not hidden away as a shameful secret. He was advertised, promoted, displayed. Audiences laughed. Some were horrified. Many returned for repeat performances. In an era where public dissections, medical theaters, and exhibitions of human anatomical anomalies were mainstream entertainment, Terrer fit comfortably into the commercialized spectacle of the body. He was not alone in this. Conjoined twins, individuals with severe deformities, people with gigantism or dwarfism, all were exhibited across Europe for profit. The Enlightenment's fascination with cataloging and observing the natural world extended to human beings who defied easy categorization. But Terrer was aware. Percy's later psychological evaluations confirmed that he showed no intellectual disability, no cognitive impairment. He understood what he was doing. He understood how people saw him. And he kept doing it, because the alternative was starving on the street. The charlatan arrangement eventually collapsed. Sources are unclear whether they parted ways or the partnership simply became unsustainable. What is certain is that by 1792, Terrer was no longer performing. France was at war. Mass conscription was sweeping the countryside, and Terrer, like hundreds of thousands of other young Frenchmen, was absorbed into the Revolutionary Army. He lasted weeks before his body gave out. The French Revolutionary Army had a system for everything. Standardized rations, approximately 1.5 pounds of bread per day, supplemented with small portions of meat, beans, or vegetables when supply lines allowed. Field hospitals organized by triage protocols. Documentation procedures for every soldier processed through military medicine. The Army of the Rhine, where Terrer was conscripted in 1793, was enormous, chaotic, and perpetually undersupplied. But it had rules. Terrer broke the system immediately. Even at quadruple the standard ration, 4 times what kept an ordinary soldier functioning, he was losing weight. He scavenged from garbage heaps. He ate from compost piles. Other soldiers reported finding him in the camps at night, consuming anything organic he could find. Within weeks, he collapsed. Not from combat, not from disease, from starvation. Despite eating more than any other man in his unit, he was transferred to the military hospital at Salts, where he came under the care of Dr. Corville, and more significantly, Baron Pierre-François Percy. Percy was not a provincial doctor. He was the French army's chief surgeon, a man who had studied in Paris, published research on battlefield medicine, and would eventually become one of Napoleon's most trusted medical advisors. He approached Tarare the way he approached everything, with enlightenment, rationality, systematic observation, and the assumption that sufficient data would yield an explanation. The first experiments were elementary. Percy needed to establish baseline consumption. He ordered meals prepared, not soldier rations, but full hospital meals intended for multiple patients. Tarare consumed a meal meant for 4 men, then one meant for 8, then 15. Percy documented each test, the quantity of food, the time required to eat it, Tarare's physical state afterward. The stomach would distend grotesquely, the skin stretching until the abdomen looked like it contained a foreign mass. Hours later, it would deflate. Tarare would report hunger again. No satiation. No sense of fullness. No point at which his body signaled enough. Percy escalated the experiments. If the problem was nutritional content rather than volume, perhaps different protein sources would affect the condition. He introduced live animals, not as punishment, not as spectacle, but as variables in a medical investigation. Tarare ate live cats, snakes, lizards, puppies, swallowed whole in front of Percy and his assistants, who documented the process with clinical detachment. Eels went down without chewing, still writhing. Percy examined Tarare's waste afterward. Partially digested fur, fragments of bone, scales, all passing through without causing intestinal obstruction or apparent pain. The body was digesting everything. That was not the problem. The problem was that digestion solved nothing. The hunger remained constant and total, regardless of what or how much Tarare consumed. Percy tried chemical intervention. Wine vinegar, administered in doses calculated to reduce appetite, a common treatment for digestive disorders in the 18th century. Tobacco pills, used as both stimulant and purgative, intended to regulate the stomach. Laudanum, opium dissolved in alcohol, to calm what Percy hypothesized might be overactive metabolic signals. Every substance in the French military medical arsenal that might affect digestion, appetite, or the body's demand for fuel. Nothing worked. Tarare's body responded to no treatment. The hunger did not diminish. His weight did not stabilize. The heat radiating from his skin, the stench that drove other patients from the ward, the bloodshot eyes and constant sweating, all remained unchanged. Percy's notes from this period betray frustration masked as clinical observation. He was documenting something that violated every principle he had been trained to apply. Humans gained weight when they consumed excess calories. Tarare did not. Appetite decreased when the stomach was full. Tarare's did not. Chemical compounds that suppressed hunger in every other patient had zero effect on this one. Percy ruled out parasites, ruled out madness. Psychological testing confirmed Tarare was cognitively intact, showing only what the doctors described as an apathetic temperament, a kind of resigned exhaustion. Ruled out digestive malformation that would prevent nutrient absorption. The waste samples proved digestion was functional. What remained was a body that burned energy at a rate that should not be survivable, a metabolism operating so far beyond normal parameters that it consumed everything Tarare ingested, and then began consuming him. Percy could observe this. He could measure it. He could document every symptom in meticulous detail, but he could not explain it, and he could not stop it. By late 1793, Percy had tested every intervention available to 18th century medicine. Tarare remained in the hospital eating meals that should have sustained a dozen men, still emaciated, still hungry, still medically impossible. Percy kept him there, not because he had a treatment plan, but because he had nothing else. The experiments continued, now more from documentation than hope. Percy was recording a condition that medicine had no framework to understand, preserving the data for a future he would not live to see. And then General Desborough arrived with a different idea. If medicine could not use Tarare, perhaps warfare could. General Desborough commanded the Army of the Rhine in 1794. He had problems. Prussian forces controlled territory between his position and scattered French units. Communication lines were compromised, and enemy patrols intercepted messengers regularly. He needed a way to move intelligence across hostile ground without detection. Someone told him about the man who swallowed everything. Desborough proposed an experiment. A document would be sealed inside a small wooden box. Tarare would swallow it. If the box survived passage through his digestive system intact, the method was viable. If the seal held, the contents would remain secure. A soldier was assigned the task of monitoring Tarrare's waste, recovering the box, cleaning it, confirming the document's condition. Tarrare swallowed the box. 48 hours later, it emerged. The seal was unbroken. The document inside was legible. Desborough had his courier method. The actual mission followed within days. Tarrare would cross Prussian lines disguised as a civilian, a peasant mentally deficient enough to explain why he could not answer questions coherently. He would carry a message to a French colonel held in a Prussian camp. The message would be inside him, invisible to standard search procedures. When he reached the colonel, he would wait for nature, recover the box, and deliver the contents. Then return. The plan had one flaw nobody addressed. Tarrare spoke no German. They dressed him in peasant clothing, gave him the cover story, made him swallow the box, and sent him toward Prussian territory. He walked for hours. Prussian sentries stopped him before he crossed into the operational zone. They asked questions in German. Tarrare, emaciated and reeking, sweating visibly despite the cold, could not respond. The sentries knew immediately something was wrong. They detained him, beat him, trying to extract information. Tarrare, terrified and in pain, confessed that the message was inside him. He pointed at his own stomach. The Prussians searched his clothing and found nothing. They did not understand. They kept him under guard, waiting for clarification, or orders, or some indication of what they would actually caught. A day passed, perhaps longer. Then the wooden box emerged. The Prussians opened it. Inside was a message addressed to the French colonel, written in French military cipher. When decoded, it contained nothing. Test communication, trivial content, designed to verify the method without risking actual intelligence if the mission failed. The Prussians were baffled. They had captured a half-dead Frenchman who had swallowed a box containing a meaningless letter. He clearly was not a conventional spy. He lacked training, language skills, even basic operational security. He was pitiable more than threatening. After several days of holding him, they expelled him back across French lines with a beating for good measure. Tarrare returned humiliated and bruised. Percy documented the mission's failure in his records. Desborough attempted no further intelligence operations using Tarrare's body as a conveyance system. The military had tested him as a tool and found him useless. He went back to the hospital. Back to Percy's experiments. Back to eating meals meant for 15 men. Back to the only place that would still feed him, despite offering no cure. The mission accomplished nothing except confirming what Tarrare already knew. Even his suffering had no practical application. He was too sick to be a soldier, too strange to be a spy, and too hungry to be left alone. Back in Percy's hospital ward, Tarrare's condition did not stabilize. It worsened. The arrangement was simple: he would remain under medical observation in exchange for food and shelter. Percy still believed, perhaps needed to believe, that sufficient study would yield understanding. But by late 1794, Tarrare had stopped being a patient. He had become something the hospital staff feared. The first incident involved blood. The hospital practiced therapeutic bleeding, a standard 18th century treatment for dozens of conditions. Patients would be bled into basins, the blood disposed of as medical waste. Staff discovered Tarrare sneaking into treatment rooms during procedures, drinking directly from the collection vessels. When interrupted, he did not stop. He fought. Orderlies had to physically remove him, and he would return the next day, waiting for the next bleeding session, desperate for what the basins contained. Then the morgue. Bodies awaiting burial were stored in the hospital basement, sometimes for days before interment. Percy's records note, without elaboration, as though the fact itself was explanation enough, that Tarrare was caught multiple times eating from corpses, not scavenging clothing or valuables. Eating the dead, the flesh of people who had died in the same building where he slept. Staff demanded his removal. Orderlies refused to work night shifts if Tarrare remained in the building. Other doctors told Percy the man was insane, dangerous, that he belonged in an asylum, not a medical ward. Percy disagreed. His psychological evaluations showed no madness. Tarrare understood what he was doing, showed no delusions, no breaks from reality. He was simply hungry enough that every human taboo, every social boundary, had become irrelevant compared to the body's demand for food. Then, the child disappeared. A 14-month-old infant, a patient in the hospital ward, vanished. The parents had stepped away briefly. When they returned, the child was gone. No witnesses, no body ever found, no evidence except proximity and suspicion. Hospital staff accused Terrer immediately. He had been seen near the ward. He had the capacity, and everyone, doctors, nurses, orderlies, patients, believed he had done it. Percy's documentation is careful here, almost evasive. He does not confirm Terrer ate the child. He also does not exonerate him. What Percy records is institutional pressure. The hospital administrators gave him an ultimatum: expel Terrer or lose the staff's cooperation entirely. Percy chose the institution. Terrer was driven out by hospital employees who believed they were removing a murderer. No charges were filed. No investigation concluded. The child was never found. Terrer disappeared from medical records. 4 years passed. He survived somehow, begging, scavenging, perhaps performing again in smaller towns where his reputation had not spread. No documentation exists for this period. He had fallen through every structure that might have observed or helped him. In 1798, a message reached Percy. Terrer was dying in a hospital in Versailles. Percy travelled to see him. The man he found was 26 years old and looked 50. Advanced tuberculosis, chronic diarrhea, the body finally consuming itself faster than even Terrer could feed it. He told Percy he had swallowed a golden fork 2 years prior and believed it was killing him. Percy recognized the desperation of a man inventing cause for suffering that had no comprehensible source. Terrer died weeks later. Percy performed the autopsy. The esophagus was a passage wide enough that Percy could look directly from the open mouth into the stomach cavity. The stomach itself occupied most of the abdominal space, grotesquely enlarged even in death, the lining covered in ulcers. The liver was swollen, covered in what Percy described as pus. The gallbladder had distended to obscene size. Every internal organ showed signs of infection or corruption. The smell was so overpowering that Percy's assistants struggled to remain in the room. And these were men trained to dissect battlefield casualties in summer heat. Percy found no golden fork. He found no tumor, no parasite, no structural malformation sufficient to explain what had driven Terrer's hunger. He documented every abnormality in meticulous detail, knowing he was recording something medicine could not yet interpret. Modern medicine has proposed theories. Severe hypothyroidism might explain the heat, the weight loss, the appetite, but not at this scale, not this extreme. Damage to the hypothalamus could disrupt hunger signals, but would not produce the anatomical changes Percy found. Prader-Willi syndrome causes insatiable appetite, but does not match the metabolic profile. Every proposed diagnosis fails somewhere, explains part of the case, but leaves gaps that do not resolve. 220 years after Percy wrote his final notes, Terrer remains medically inexplicable. Not because doctors have not tried to diagnose him, but because his body violated categories that still do not fully exist. Percy preserved the case for history, hoping future physicians would understand what he could not. That hope has not been fulfilled. What we know is this: Terrer was hungry, always. He ate everything. Nothing ever made him full. And he died at 26, in a body so corrupted that even the surgeon who had studied him for years could barely stand to open it. He was not a monster. He was sick in an era that had no framework for what he was, surrounded by people who could not help him. The tragedy is not what Terrer did. It is that he was born at all. Terrer's story is not a curiosity. It is what happens when a human being suffers from something medicine cannot name. Percy tried everything his century allowed, but Enlightenment science had no language for metabolic disaster, no treatment for a body destroying itself. Terrer died unexplained, in flesh so ruined his own doctor recoiled. He deserved better than spectacle, better than suspicion, better than this. He was simply sick, incurably in the wrong century.